works, it's usable. So we've had the tomato example. Now switching over to table grapes. So we do a lot of work with the wine grape industry here in the United States and California, in upstate New York, and Pennsylvania. Usually when you're dealing with wine grapes, though, those guys are real, they don't want you to tell anybody about the results. So when you're working with them, they gotta pay me extra because I can't use their examples with other people. They're very secretive. We work with a couple of vineyards in France and in Italy, but they won't even let me tell you what their names are. They're that reclusive. One of the vineyards that we work with in Italy has vines that, to the best of anybody's knowledge, are 450 years old. Wow. Do not tell me you have to replace your vines after 15 to 20 years. Who's making money on that deal? So you're gullible enough to believe some chemical person, oh, well, you're seeing that decrease in productivity in your vines because these vines just get old. Right. Then grapevines, they're maybe old at 500 years. Because these guys have some of the best production and absolutely some of the best grapes. And they sell their bottles of wine for $200 to $300 each. I don't make enough money to buy the wine that I help make. And I'm not discerning enough to tell the difference between that and something out of Australia.
So, but certain like hybrids or something, and with apple trees, for instance, when they do dwarfing, can you manage to keep those going longer? Because they say, oh yeah, the dwarf tree is fine for us, but 15, 20 years or something, you gotta get rid of them.
I just don't know on that one. And I can't see why dwarfing a tree would cause it to live a less period of time. Because look at the rootstock that it's on. Now, how long does that tree live out in the real world? Hundreds of years. So that's what I really go back and look at. And and there's such a drive to make money in the commercial world that they'll tell you any kind of lie in order to get you to buy more. And so who's the moron when we trust that kind of attitude? So I would really question it. Now, I need data to do other than question it. But I know certainly with the older grapevines, the non-hybrids, the ones that have been around for a great deal of time, I see no purpose in tearing them out when they get to be 15 to 20 years old. That's absolutely ridiculous. If we get the biology back into the soil, we see them back at same productivity level, if not higher, and usually higher. I typically don't promise people increases of yields of 20 to 30%, but it is typically what we see. So take that one as, I need data. I want you all out there looking at these kinds of things and helping us show that if you get the biology back around the root systems of these plants, that they're not short-lived little plants. So in this particular example with Vineyard World, table grapes. This was Table Grapes, Grape Exchange Australia, and they had farms all the way from Ingham up in the northern part up around Darwin. So they had grape vineyards all the way, so they had about 30-some farms all the way through the central part of that country down to Melbourne. So going from the very wet part, the tablelands up in the northern part of Australia, down through the extremely dry parts of Australia. Now, in the time period that we're talking about, they had been suffering drought for about 35 years. The drought broke for a year or two, and now they're back to this really dry pattern. So we're back in the same drought problems as before. But back in 2006, middle of this terrible drought, we asked them if we could show them how this system worked. Would they be willing to let us try this? So they had one of the farms right there in the middle of Australia, right near Wagga Wagga. Gotta love that name. Because I come from Wagga Wagga. What are you, Reagan? So one of these farms that had never produced a crop of grapes because they didn't have the water. It was a huge problem. So Why not let us have that farm? They were trying to sell it, couldn't sell it. Nobody in their right mind would buy a grape farm, a vineyard that didn't have enough water to grow the grapes. So they were kind of stuck with this farm anyway, so they went ahead and let us take over. So in that year, we bought turners and we bought trommel screens to set up a composting operation. That composting operation, we took all of the on-farm waste materials. We took manures from the animal production systems near us. There was a chicken operation just down the road with tons and tons and tons of chicken manure, and at that time they were trying to get rid of the chicken manure, so we basically got it for free for the cost of transportation. So we had all the components that went into making that compost. The woody component, wide carbon to nitrogen ratios, about 40–45%. Into the pile, we have the green component, so green plant material, harvested green, let to dry, so the starting materials were all dry when they went into the pile. So about 30% of your pile, and then the remainder of the pile, that chicken manure, or some beef operation was close to us. So that was the material going into the pile. Had to buy a turner, so that was a significant investment. That's about $75,000 right there. The turner and the tractor to run it. You have to have granny gears to do that. So think about the cost involved. We then bought the tanks to make the compost tea, and each of the tanks held 1,000 liters. So what is that? It's about 500 gallons of compost tea in each one of those, and we had 4 of those to be able to put out compost tea or extract as required. Under the vines, we then laid down compost at about 10 tons to the hectare, so again about 2.5 tons per acre, going out right, concentrated right underneath the vines. We didn't have enough compost to spread it on the driving rows in between, so part of the system didn't get any good compost. And then after the compost went down, we covered it with a layer of straw, because very clearly when you're suffering drought of that magnitude, you have to retain all the possible water that you can. So we put waste plant material on top of the compost to protect it from drying out. Then 3 applications of compost tea went on the vines. And we completely wiped out the foliar pests, so the aphids, the whiteflies, the other insect pests that were causing problems on these vines. We didn't have any mildew. We had no foliar fungal problems, and so a great deal of what had been preventing these crops from being able to produce, we got rid of using the biological approach. In that year, in 2006, this farm was the only farm in Australia that produced grapes. So we made a killing price-wise. We more than paid for the turner, the trommel screener, all of the training that we did of the people on the farm and the tea brewers, and these guys came out with a profit. The only farm they had that made a profit in that year. So, in 2007, how many of their farms did they convert? All of them. So everything they do and everything that they've been doing for since then, everything is going along with compost and compost tea. That is their productivity. And they remain in extremely good financial condition, despite the fact that, I don't know, I think Australia is going down financially these days. So they're doing a good job. They're extremely happy with these results. And Bill Avery is the person that I work with these guys, and he continues to be their consultant for their farms. And they've been expanding their operations, so it's been making a boatload of money. Another case where you have to talk to these guys before you get started with them. You do expect to share in that profit. So it's kind of the same story over and over that we're talking about here. Here is an example from the Ukraine. The group that I was working with, they had gone into the Ukraine and rented land, 50,000 hectares of property, and then said, we're going to go organic. Right? It's not that simple. We can't just like, oh, we're not going to put pesticides or organic fertilizers out, and we're going to put in our grain crops. Total failure the first 2 years that they were converting to organic, and the third year they tried to use a biodynamic approach. Biodynamic, you make a lot of plant teas of various kinds in certain ways and combinations that you put that material out, and it was just a total failure. So they brought us in the fourth year. And we started making compost. So again, there are soils, totally bacterial dominated, no protozoa, no beneficial nematodes, root-feeding nematodes like you would not believe in the soil. We were getting 500 or 600 root-feeding nematodes per gram of the soil. You don't have a plant left in about 2 weeks when you've got that level of root-feeding nematode. It was just totally astounding. So, do everything to make the compost so that it would have the biology to start combating those bad sets of organisms. Put back in the beneficial fungi, put back in the protozoa, the good nematodes, so starting on this. Went out and bought a tractor. The tractor arrives on the property. We use it one day to start the compost, turn everything, come back in the next morning, and the tractor's gone. Gone. So, trying to track it down, find out where it went. You had to bribe the right people in order to find out who took your tractor, because it was one of the policemen. So get the tractor back, okay, and in which time, your compost has suffered a little bit while you're trying to find your tractor. So they put, big fences, they had a night watchman, got the tractor back, had the tractor working for a couple of days, and walked back in the door in the morning, and the tractor's gone. Okay, Mr. Policeman, where's our tractor? No, it wasn't him. It was one of the other people on farm that decided he wanted to use the tractor for something else. But during that time while we're trying to track it down, the compost is not being turned on time. It's not being maintained. Really frustrating working in this kind of situation where they just are not keeping track of things properly. But we did get the compost made. It was probably not the best, it wasn't the best compost in the world. It lacked the nematodes completely. It really didn't have a very good protozoan level. Yeah, we were getting some fungi in there, but when you go anaerobic for a period of time, you don't turn it on time, we're going to lose a lot of those beneficial fungi. So given that caveat here, and because our tractor kept disappearing, we didn't make the amount of compost that we wanted to, so we couldn't do it on all 50,000 acres. We ended up only doing this on 10,000 acres. I think that's, or 50,000 hectares. So we did this on 10,000 hectares. So we had different plots. The results here, we're looking at the control, where this is the commercial chemical system. And so you're looking at the data coming from the typical chemical system. And then where we're putting the extract, because everything we did was to go onto the soil. So we didn't fix this, so we used extracts, we didn't use tea. We didn't have power, and that was the other problem. We didn't have continuous power through the night, ever, in order to be able to make a tea, where you have to brew a tea and you have to have the aeration going for a full 24 hours. That does not happen in Ukraine. No way. So we just made extract instead. So the best extract we could make, a little deficient in some of the biology, but you can see the difference. This is an average of all of these 3 different applications. So let me go through the apps again. When we're dealing with a chemical system, you put in 1 seed, it's going to make 1 head of grain. And on a head of grain here in the chemical system, you have 30 seeds on that head. Okay, not a bad yield. At least you're getting some yield here. It's increasing your seed by 36-fold. When we put in 1 seed and we soak this seed in the compost extract for 15 minutes, let it dry down, put it out into the field, each one of those seeds produced 3 tillers. Each tiller made a head, and we had 32 seeds on each head. So now from one seed, we've got about 100 seeds in return. So a huge increase in yield over the chemical system. The next treatment, so a lot of our acreage, we only have enough extract to put in to soak the seeds, and that was it. Now some of the acreage, we were capable of soaking the seed in the extract, and then as soon as we hit first true leaf stage, we went out and put on another application of extract, so sprayed it out over the fields. And in this case, instead of 3 tillers, we made about, I think it was, 10 tillers, I think I'm right, 9 to 10 tillers per seed. Each one of those tillers has a seed head, and instead of 30 seeds, we now have 34 seeds on those heads. So massive increase in yields in that part. Where we could sow the seed and put on 2 applications of the compost extract. So at first true leaf stage was the first extract application. About a month later was the second application. And there we're looking at 12 to 15 tillers per seed. And each of those seed heads has 36 seeds on it. Just, wow, increasing yields. All of the villagers would be out looking at those fields going, wow, look at the size of those seeds, they're just fantastic. How do we get this stuff? Well, here's what you have to do, compost and extract and tea. So we go out to harvest this stuff. So we're out harvesting and we're going, wow, look at all the seeds that we got. This is just going to be fantastic. We're going to save this whole project. We're going to give the investors back their money. So the dump trucks are out there. We put the seed into the dump trucks, go away for the night, come back in the morning, and the dump trucks are empty. All of the yield got stolen. So what we figure happened is everybody from the village came down in the middle of the night and said, let's grab some of this stuff. Because we are dealing with the old Soviet system, you know, everything belongs to everybody. And so they figured they had the right to just come out and share in the harvest, which meant we didn't have any harvest, so these, you know, and it's not my fault that they couldn't guard their trucks. All the people I was working with doing the microbiology on the compost and the compost teas and documenting the improvement in the soil, all of a sudden they got to be on guard duty. But it was too little too late, especially as we lost probably 10 big dump trucks of yield. When that happens, it's, you know, we just didn't get the money back for the investors. But we do have this data, a little bit of information coming from this trial that it would be so great if we could go back and repeat this. But there wasn't enough money to continue for the next year, and so that group that I was working with had to shut down and quit. Oh, you have the data, so there it is. Now here's another fun one. Now starting to go a little bit smaller scale. This is the giant pumpkin world. How many of you are into giant pumpkins? There is a whole competition that goes on every year in on the mainland, where in every state where they can grow giant pumpkins, you get crazy people that just absolutely want to prove they are the best gardeners ever. And for this, we worked a lot with a number of these different pumpkin growers, and this happens to be Brant. Last year they grew the West Coast record, so he's in California. He won the state of California's largest pumpkin. And then he goes on to the next competition for the West Coast. And so you can see his weight on that one pumpkin. And it was grown completely just with compost and compost tea. So the soil was compost basically. The seed was soaked in compost tea where they had added mycorrhizal fungi at the last minute. Put the mycorrhizal fungi so the root system gets mycorrhizal right from the last second. And it was the 13th largest giant pumpkin ever produced in the history of the United States. So competing with all of the giant pumpkins over all time. So he was really happy. Most of the people who have won the Giant Pumpkin Award over the last couple of years have all been doing it with compost and compost tea. So smaller scale, getting the biology to fix the system, providing nutrition, grow larger plants. So, any questions?
pumpkin, we were talking nutritional values. Is there any nutritional value in a 1,600-pound pumpkin?
Yeah, there is. It makes some really great pumpkin pie. But here's where we need to be doing that nutritional analysis. All of these guys, we need to have that nutritional analysis done. Well, in a pumpkin, what are you looking for in a pumpkin? So folks are working with nutritionists. Here we go. Keep on our case, everybody. So I'd love to work on some of this and raise some grants and give them money to do all of this nutritional analysis on all of these sorts of things. On your, there's some simple nutritional analyses, or do we have to go to a big lab? So
I have a question about taro. We grow a lot of taro and different varieties, and there are some giant varieties, but we had this taro plant near where we butcher pigs, and just the regular variety, which would have normally got maybe, this tall, maybe this tall. And that thing is as tall as me because when we butchered the pig, we threw some pig blood out there. I mean, did that change the biology?
Well, it probably didn't really change the biology. You put in organic forms of nitrogen, and so those bacteria and fungi kind of went, wee-ha! All that great protein, all that great nitrogen. It's not nitrate, it's not ammonium in the blood, it's protein. So blood contains a massive amount of proteins and great thing for bacteria and fungi to grow on. So yeah, you probably did because of that altered biology and then what happens with the protozoa and the nematodes, you probably speeded up nutrient cycling, and so your plant got the benefit of that material. So it didn't cause harm, instead it kicked biology in the butt and got moving. And so it had that effect on the plant growth. Yeah. Without that damaging water, without damaging your soil as well. Question?
I know the answer, but I'd like for you to elaborate your opinion. What about the compost teas that you buy at Home Depot? And
see the eyes rolling? You really have to get your microscope and take a look. On rare occasions, it can be okay. But because the guys at Home Depot don't really know what they're doing, they're just following a list of instructions, and so when that stuff starts to stink, they just kind of go, oh, it is what it is. Well, if it's stinky, don't buy it. It's anaerobic.
But even after you bottle it, transport it, go across country, is that the right system for your acres?
Well, yeah, because it kind of depends on where you buy it. If you go to your local Home Depot or place and buy it and get it out there within just a few hours, it's probably local compost that they made it with. It's the local organisms already adapted to living here. Hopefully they brewed that compost tea at ambient conditions. So there's a question you might ask them. Where did this stuff actually come from? And if you get it home enough and spray it out before it goes anaerobic, but now you're buying it at the store, and what do? They fill up the gallon jug and they screw the cap down. So what's going on in that jug? If you've got any microbial growth in there at all, how fast is it going to be before that goes anaerobic? And why did you waste your money buying that stuff? So if you do buy it, open that cap up as soon as you possibly can. Now how are you going to get it home without it sloshing out? And, okay, every 20 seconds you're going to open it up and then close it down. Open it up. So, how easy is it to make compost tea? Thursday, we will go over that. It's so simple to make your own. Well, I talked about it the other day. Compost extract. Your 5-gallon bucket of water. Compost tea or compost in your bag. Massage 30 seconds. And there you go, you got extract. Does it have enough organisms? If it doesn't, then you dump that compost out, you put some more compost in that bag, massage for 30 seconds. After you do that once or twice or 3 times, you know how many, okay, I'm going to have to do that 3 times before I get the right biology, and then put it out. So there's no problem with it going in. Yeah, so if you want to make tea, it's a little bit different. You're going to have an air pump. You're going to have to let that go for 24 hours.
Maybe this is a question for Thursday, but back on the protein, you know, they say don't put any protein, meat, cheese, whatever in the compost.
Why not?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was
Attractive.
well, what they worry about is you start putting meat and cheese and things that have massively high levels of protein in them. The bacteria start attacking that, and you can go anaerobic so fast. It's not funny. So, is it safer to tell people just don't put cheese or poop or stuff like that? Why can't you put your dog poop? Why can't you put your cat poop into your compost pile? You can put cow poop in there. So why not those? Oh well, your cow poop or your cat poop or your dog poop could have a whole lot of human pathogens. But like chicken manure doesn't have a whole lot of human pathogens? Well, of course it does. So does cow manure. So does any manure you want to talk about, except for maybe earthworm manure. So if you manage the pile correctly, there is no danger. The danger is you can't go anaerobic. As soon as you go anaerobic, if there's any human pathogens in there, they may be recovering and starting to out-compete and grow. And now when you play with your compost and you then lick your fingers, oops, bad news. And that's where we deal with human outbreaks of disease when people have used not properly produced compost.
And you're going to go through how to do it properly and do this.
Yes, and there's not just one way. There's 1,000 ways to get to the same endpoint. So I'll try to cover a lot of those, but I can't go over all 1,000 ways. I'll give you the outlines.
I'll just wait for the compost. It was about to turn and not to turn.
Yeah, there's a trade-off, isn't there? You turn, you're going to be slicing and dicing your fungi, and your nematodes are going to be going, run for the hills, this is destroyed. So, okay, you turn when you have to turn, but you leave it alone. If you don't have to fuss with it, you leave it alone. The lazy gardener's approach to making compost. So, how much nitrogen? How much? So, we'll get to those questions on Thursday. So, I want to move on then and talk about pasture systems. You focus a little bit on dairies here because those are the people mostly that have money to do this kind of research. So I don't think it really makes any difference whether we're talking dairy cows or we're talking beef cows or we're talking llama or we're talking anything else. Examples of pasture. Pastures crop like anything else. The most productive pastures require equal biomass of fungi as compared to bacteria. They also require that you're going to be focused on your indigenous sets of microorganisms. If you're getting compost from California and you're dragging it out here and put it on your property, what's the likelihood that those bacteria and those fungi, protozoa, or nematodes are going to survive under your conditions? Not. Because they're used to a very dry climate. Certain parts of the year, maybe they'll come back, but let's go after the local. The indigenous thing. So, you know, this is your rice out in your really good ecosystem, so you're getting the really good organisms. I, however, don't go with just rice. Let's put out more food sources than that. How many of those really good fungi in your open forest grow on rice? Yeah, how many times have really good old growth forest fungi seen rice? Not. So I tend to say a little bit more diversity would be a good idea. So the first thing we want to do when we go to a pasture system is let's check the biology. What's there? What are we lacking? And then what needs to be into the compost to put those organisms back into the system? Can you make enough compost to put just compost out there, or it's easier to extract those organisms and put them out through water? Or extract the organisms, grow them up to high level, and put those guys out. So there it's really kind of a question of cost, how much compost you have, how much really good compost you have. So let's think about all of those things. So this example is from Camper Down Compost. They had for years been taking paunch waste from a local slaughterhouse and putting the paunch waste in with a bunch of dry material composting that up, and then nice windrows of compost. But all the local people near to them would buy their compost, would work really well, but if you're transporting compost more than 2 or 3 miles, it gets too expensive. People can't afford it. So great, they have all this wonderful resource, and it's too expensive to get it out to the dairies that are 30 miles, 100 miles, 200 miles away. So, what do? So what these guys did, working with a number of dairies. So this is one of the dairies they were working with, and you can see nice, pretty pasture in the springtime. Middle of a drought, this turns brown and pretty ugly fairly rapidly. So the next farm, and you can actually go to Landline in Australia and get the hour-long special that they did on this particular farm using the camper-down compost. So the next farm, just to kind of give you an idea of where we are. Doesn't look that different from some parts of Hawaii, does it? Yes, those are eucalyptus. This is Australia. This is the area around Melbourne, just west of Melbourne. The problems with all the dairy guys was that their fertilizer costs were out of control. They were being told that they need to put on 800 pounds of nitrogen per acre. In order to grow their pasture, that's what they had to put on. And I heard that number and I just kind of went, whoa, who's making money on this dairy operation? It's not the guy doing the work. It's the guy convincing that dairy person to put on 800 pounds of urea per acre. So, pretty scary. They had insect problems on their alfalfa. Lucerne is what they say called alfalfa in that part of the world. So they had to be buying insecticides to deal with those insects. When the animals were out in the pasture, the animals were pulling the grass out by the roots. And so pretty soon their pastures were getting pretty bare. Lots of erosion, losing their soil down the hill, because you can see how hilly these farms actually are. So pretty good erosion starting to happen. So every year they would have to resow their pastures. And it's $20,000 a field. So consider the cost on that, where every place you're grazing your animals. Most of these farms are 300-acre farms. So, you know, they're resowing 5 or 6 pastures a year. Think of the cost. Of course they're going broke. When they look at their pastures, there's no clover. There is no nitrogen fixation in their pastures, so you can see the dependence on the urea going out as a source of nitrogen. Question? Most of these growers, when we started working with them, were extremely disillusioned. They were all planning on selling their farm. They couldn't find anybody to buy their farm. They were just, it's very depressing to have been talking to these guys. They were all on the edge of suicide, I think, because they just didn't, there was nothing that they could do. They had no management of their manures either, so we're a little further ahead on this than most places in the United States. But this is their milking area, so they bring the animals in, they'll feed the animals just before they milk them, and then all the manure goes down. They use a big truck that waters, it pushes it down into this trough, and it goes out into the lagoons over here. So every milk, and you milk animals twice a day. Every 12 hours, you've got more manure going into the system. Can you imagine the smell on this thing in the middle of the summer? You do not want to live downwind a dairy farm, because their lagoons are completely full of manure. Now, the liquid rises to the top, and the liquid moves off into these other lagoons, so the clearing lagoons, and then they'll use this extremely high nitrate level water to water their pastures, their paddocks. Of course, it's extremely high in nitrate, and it's killing the grass. So they're noticing the grass does not regrow back very rapidly. They've got a problem trying to feed their animals. They've had to reduce their herd size. because they're not getting regrowth on the grasses. So immediately, the first year you put this nitrate-laden water out, you get a little bit of a growth response, it's looking better, things are good, and then the response starts to peter off, and pretty soon you don't have any grass left in your pasture. So pretty frightening what these guys were facing. So here comes Camper Down Compost, and they say, we can take this manure. Let's use this manure and make compost on your farm. So right here on farm, we have to find some woody materials, and the dairy guys are no problem. From all my woodlot areas, I've got all the wood chips, I've got straw that we harvest, we've got all the weeds on the edge of the road that we can harvest, and so we've got the green and woody material going in there, and we've got the high nitrogen. If you aren't dealing with a dairy farm, then you grow a field of alfalfa or something like that. So there's their compost piles. So with Camper Down Compost, they have a route that they follow. So today, they're going to go out to these 10 farms. And the first farm, the farmer has put the woody material out and go and get the front end loader and put the green material down and then put the manure down. And then they arrive with the turner, jump out of here, up and turn those compost piles with the turner. So there's the turner, it goes on a flatbed, comes around, and you can see the wood chip material and the leaf material and all the components going into that compost pile turn. And so they know the recipe. They know that they have to come back here in 3 days to turn the pile, because the temperature on this pile is going to get up hot enough where it has to be turned. Because we get the temperature up so high, we're killing all the human pathogens, all the plant pathogens, all the weed seed, all the root-feeding nematodes, absolutely wiped out. But the outside of the pile doesn't get up to temperature. You have to turn the compost pile. So you get the stuff that's on the outside moved into the center. The material that's in the center has been dealt with in terms of pathogens and seeds and blah, blah, blah. And so why not get it on the outside? Your turner needs to turn in a certain pattern. So they know 3 days from now, turner's going to be back. So the route. Today I'm doing these 10 farms, and then tomorrow I'm going to do these 3 farms, and the next day I do these 3 farms, and then I come back to the first 3 and turn again. Recipe is 3 days later, we're going to turn this pile again. 5 days later, we will turn this pile a 3rd time, and that's it. In about 6 weeks, we will have finished compost. So the dairyman is out there measuring the compost piles. Doesn't really mind, because we've reduced his workload by so much that replacing that workload with just going out there and measuring temperature and pile is no big deal. So there's a thermometer, so there's a little scale that you can read that thermometer in the middle of the pile. And if the pile starts doing something weird, you call up the guys with the turner and they come back a little bit early. So the first year, making the compost, because it's right there on farm, there's no transportation issues. So they're putting it out at 1.5 tons per acre, or 3 tons per hectare. In the first year, because most of these dairy guys were like, we just really don't believe this is going to work. We really, that's not enough nitrogen going on here. We just couldn't convince them that the compost contains massive amounts of nitrogen in that organic matter. So we did allow them to put on calcium nitrate or their pond water, up to them which one they wanted, just because they couldn't quite get off the chemical wheel. We said also, if they saw any fertility problems, they could go out there with fish hydrolysate in a tea spray. So if they saw any problems, so go ahead and make them feel good. None of them did that. There was never any need. So going on, there's Andrew's pasture in the first summer that we put compost and compost tea out there. Look at the clover. Massive amounts of clover. 50% of the plants in that field are now clover. And of course, Andrew's consultant, animal veterinarian, his consultant said, "Oh no, this is terrible. Clover causes bloat. Your animals are all going to have bloat." None of his animals have bloat. None of them. Now, he's always had a problem with bloat in his animals previously. So what causes bloat in an animal? It's high levels of nitrate in the plant material. Nitrate causes bloat, not clover. Yeah, but if you got clover and you're pouring on nitrogen fertilizer, what's the clover going to do with the excess nitrogen? Sticks it in the leaves as nitrate. So there's this fallacy about clover causes bloat. No, it's not the clover. It's an extremely high nitrate level in a plant that doesn't need nitrogen fertilizer. We're not putting any nitrogen fertilizer down here at all. So this clover is absolutely great stuff, and we're starting to get normal nitrogen fixation in the root systems of those plants. So I have never seen clover with these big, pumping large leaves like that. Remember that when the animals were grazing this grass previously, when they would take a bite, they'd rip up the root system, because the root system was only down, if you were lucky, 2, maybe 3 inches. So an animal takes a bite and just rips it up, root systems and all. So here we are. The summer of the year that we started doing this, we're digging up the root systems. Your animals going to be pulling the plants out by the roots? Not a chance. So those root systems, after just a couple months, are down there 2 to 3 feet deep into the soil. Resowing, thing of the past. These guys have not resowed a paddock, any field. They have not had to at all once you start on the compost heap. Now this is an example from Andrew's farm, and this is his neighbor. And you can see that his neighbor has just resowed this paddock, this pasture. And so watch over the months. So this is December, this is springtime, early springtime in this time of the year. Not early, it's kind of mid-springtime, December. It's hard to remember that they're in the southern hemisphere. And so December is, it's early summer, really. Yeah, spring. So they've just resowed. Now watch what goes on with this side of the paddock as compared to here, where we haven't resowed at all in the last several years. And watch the growth process. So this is April. So that was December. Now this is April. This pasture has been grazed 5 times since December. You put the animals on here, they graze the grass down, you take the animals off, so they go to a different paddock, they do cell grazing in this part of the world, and you're supposed to leave the animals off this field for 30 days. They were putting the animals back on after 10 days because the growth of the grass was so fast. So we are sitting here at 10 days after the last grazing. And this is ready to be grazed again. Now, on this side of the pasture, this is the neighbor. It's been grazed once. And he could not put his herd out there. He could only put the dairy cows that are in reserve. So I'm not quite sure what that is, but it wasn't the whole herd. And look at that pasture. It's been grazed once, 5 times. Because of the biology, we're getting the nutrient cycling. So now they've grazed 7 times, and you look at the still has been only grazed once during the whole growing season at this point. No nitrogen at all. No nitrogen fertilizer being applied. Only compost tea. If the grower feels like it, it takes 10 days for the pasture to recover from the grazing, so they're increasing their dairy herd size. Look at that. And why would an animal not graze this?
What kind of grass are they?
It's all, we're seeing a shift in the kind of grass. So when we first started with them, it was a POA that they had out there, a ryegrass. And with time, we've shifted away from the ryegrass into the much more productive bent grasses, the fescues, much better for the animal's nutrition.
And they sowed those?
No.
But it just naturally came.
They just came back. So those seeds were sowed previously. Every time they had to re-sow the pasture, those were the seeds that were put in. But they never grew, they never did well, so the POA is what came up. As we shift that biology, now the more productive grasses are what germinate and grow. So again, it's a shift from that extremely bacterial into the fungal bacterial system, just nitrate to nitrate and ammonium present for the animals.
Just a question. When those dairies got the huge lagoon system tied into their milking operation, how do you untie that infrastructure? Because just are you built? Because it's already so set that everything washes down, flushes out. Once it's in that flush system, you can't really make a good compost out of that.
Oh yeah, because when that lagoon fills up, and now what do you do with all that waste material? That's where they had to go build that lagoon, and then that filled up. Okay, now you got 2 lagoons full of solids, so you have to go dig another one, and then you go dig another one. So now we're going back into these previous lagoons with a front end loader and digging that out and taking it over, and we're using that to make the compost. So now they don't have to go dig another lagoon.
Okay.
Now they'll fill this one up. Well, we're going to reuse.
So you're working with the existing infrastructure of that lagoon system.
Right.
So it takes then years for that lagoon, or how long does it take for that lagoon to cycle through that?
With the size of the herds that they need, and they're increasing the size of the herds because look at the pastures. It probably takes about 18 months to fill up one of those things with the manure.
And then you can take it out of production for what, 6 months?
Because now, as you fill up that lagoon, because we've used up all the manure in here, we've used up all the manure over there, we've used up all this manure. So as they fill, we're taking and making compost.
So if you had to redesign it, would you still use the lagoon system to make your compost?
I probably wouldn't. Other than the lagoon is kind of a convenient deep hole to put stuff into.
Yeah, but it's also a septic system and all the other everything else. You could technically take that manure.
Doesn't have to be. You don't have to suffer that kind of smell. We're getting them to put compost. We're getting them to put compost and tea on the manure. Now we're shutting down the smell. There's a lot of what EM as well will do a similar kind of thing where you're putting in the organisms that don't produce the vomitous odors. Lactobacillus doesn't allow production of the ammonia, the phosphine gas, they don't do that. So as you shift the biology, you are improving loss of, you're not losing your nutrients because it isn't the biology that produces those noxious gases.
Okay.
So changing it. They've actually filled in 3 of their lagoons at this point, and now they've got more pasture land. Because we don't have to have as many lagoons, so they're filling them back in, and it's just that first lagoon that's got manure going into it. As it fills up about halfway, we're putting that into compost production. So the liquid going over into the second lagoon, that's all they have to have. Now, is there a better way to design that? We'll go back to how the USDA, why they started saying dairy lagoons. Why did we start digging big pits and putting the manure in there? Because we didn't know what to do with it. And they figured we would figure out what to do with it before the lagoon filled up. We didn't figure out what to do with it. Look at the lagoons that these guys had before we started with them. Get that manure turned into compost. Fix the problem. So, results. Deeper and larger root systems. Cows aren't pulling the grasses out. So we are reducing the cost of resowing the pastures. So in the first year, just because they did not resow, they saved about $80,000 because they didn't have to resow their pastures. I think those guys were a little interested in that. Don't spend $80,000 you can keep in your pocket, you can buy other equipment. Nitrogen reduced by over half. You hear these guys and they're like, just don't believe this is possible, just don't believe that this can be. So many of them still spent money, but we reduced at least by half the amount of nitrogen, the urea. And so that right there is a savings of over $100,000 in the first year. We converted their wastes into something good. We didn't have insects, we didn't have disease pressures. The cows were doing much better. So instead of these big droopy noses on the cows, and the cows having to live in ammonia land whenever they're at the, in the dairy building, they're helping improve dramatically. How do you document that? We need a veterinarian to work on these things. Increase their stocking rates by 15%, and their mycorrhizal fungi in their pasture grasses have gone from 4% to 87%. So in the first year alone, we saved them $180,000. Second year, $50,000 more in the fertilizer decrease, plus they didn't have to resow any of their remaining pastures. So again, another close to $100,000 that we saved them in the second year. When they look at their plant tissues, perfectly balanced. The calcium magnesium ratios in their soil, perfectly balanced. 7 times more calcium than magnesium. When they dig into their soil, it's easy to dig in there, has good structure. You pick up your soil even when it's 50% moisture and squeeze it, it doesn't ball up. So better infiltration. The soil, the mud that they're tracking into the house is a different color. It doesn't stain, it doesn't cause problems inside. One of the farmers used to put out gibberellic acid in order to increase the plant growth. Gibberellic acid is a plant growth hormone. The last time he tried doing that, there was absolutely no effect. No benefit to applying a plant growth hormone because the plant was already growing as fast as it could grow. Before we started with them, their grasses had a Brix of 1 to 2. Of course they're being attacked by insects. They're up to, in this one particular farm, now up to 11 to 13. And another farm I will show you that it's up to 18 to 22. When you look at percent protein in these grasses, they've gone from 5 to 6% protein up to 22 to 25% protein. Think of the effect on the animal. Milk production is increased. They don't lose any of the calves. So when it comes to calving season, the animals are healthy. They're not losing the animals at 2 to 3 years. The animals are staying healthy, so they don't have to replace the herd. So animals are living much longer. How much longer? We don't know because they haven't died.
What is Brix?
Brix is sap. When you squeeze the sap out of a plant, Brix measures the percent solids in that liquid. Most of the solid material in your plant sap is sugar, but there'll be some other proteins and things like that. So when you have a refractometer, you have a little window on the top, you open that little window and you squeeze your plant juice onto that little window, you close the cover so it's a uniform depth of the plant sap, and then you hold it out to the sunlight. And what you do is look in there with your eye, and you have a scale. So you're looking at a circle of light inside of there. A scale over on this side, and it goes from like minus 10 up to 30 or something like that. And you'll see a line. And so it's darker color on the bottom, lighter color on the top, so you see the line in between those two things. The percent solid is where you're reading that line and most of the sugar. So what's the sugar content in your sap? The fuzziness of that line tells you the percent protein. The fuzzier the line, the more protein you have in your plant sap. And you want that nice and high. So we want Brix up around 18 to 22% in prices. Well, think about what it means when you have a Brix of 1 to 2. There's not much sugar. That plant's not growing.
Is that something that we could do? Is that an expensive machine?
Yeah, it's about $100, maybe $150. So Pike Labs in I think it's Maine sells those for a pretty reasonable price, but I'll bet you can find something closer. I just don't know what it would be here in Hawaii. So you can read the improvements, so pretty massive, the change. The first year that we started work, that Camping Out Compost started making compost on farm with the dairy people. We had 5 people working with them. Well, over the fence, all of their neighbors are going, "What are you doing? How come I'm not seeing you down at the fertilizer store?" How come that's not coming to call on you? They have reduced the number of times that vet comes out to see them from like once a week to once every 6 months. Now, there's a savings we haven't even included in this analysis. So, over in the backyard, now there's all these others. So, the second year we had about 15 dairy people working with them. So, that summer, he invited me to come out and give a talk about the soil food web, and he gave some of this data that I'm showing you here. He figured he'd get maybe 50 people coming to see that seminar.
She's the lightest one. You wanted to see a refresh on that? I've got a couple of those.
The bricks.
Yeah, the bricks. Yeah, you guys.
280. So, he was in a world of hurt for consultants, for people to work with them, to a lot more compost. This year he's got about 500 growers. So, we are having a big impact, huge, in this part of the world. Yes. In other parts of the world, we still have to keep working. It's organic farms, right? Just because you're organic, does that mean you have your biology in shape? No way. Here is one of the oldest organic farms in England. And I walked out to this pasture and I went, oh, this is horrible. You don't have any good life in your soil. And the farm manager is, what do you mean? How can you tell? Well, look at all of the urine spots. So every place where the cow is peed or pooped, look at where they will not touch that grass. They won't eat it because the nitrate levels in that grass is so high it causes bloat. They kill themselves. So, the pasture manager is all like, well, it's perfectly fine, we're organic. Doesn't mean anything. You may not have it right at all. So I went out there with a penetrometer, going out. Penetrometer is just that metal rod. Push it into the soil. Now, this was a fancy, schmancy penetrometer, so it had a pressure gauge on the top. And the metal bar sits on the pressure plate on the bottom of your pressure gauge. So as you push down, you can actually read the PSI that you have to apply in order to push that metal rod through the soil. So, in a reasonable soil, you should be able to take that pressure gauge, and without more than 10 or 15 pounds per square inch, you should be able to push that penetrometer all 4 feet down into the ground. So I walk out into this pasture, put it on the surface, and this far into the ground at 600 PSI. And I'm going, this is bad. This is, you don't have a good pasture. Of course, you realize now the root systems of the grasses are only going down this far. And the pasture manager says, you hit a rock. That's why you're only going down that far. Okay, fine. Move over a couple feet. Then move over a couple feet and it's the same thing. But you hit another rock. And so we move over here, same thing. That deep, and we're at 600 over here, over there, everywhere in that pasture we went. So you're trying to tell me that your whole entire pasture is underlain at this depth with a layer of rock? Don't think so. You have a real problem. Oh, well, this is because this is where we let the animals out from the dairy barn. After we milk them, they all go out here, and so they compacted it. They were out here when it was wet, so they compacted this all down. Okay, if that's true, let's go over to the pasture over here. Compacted exactly the same. Same kind of manure spots and urine patches, and they have a lot of work to do. They don't want to hear it, but I always figured they'll be back. They'll come back again someday. So just because we're organic does not mean they know what they're doing in terms of biology. So we have a lot of, what should we call it, organic by substitution instead of organic by reality. I went to his vegetable farm and the vegetable part of the farm. And, you know, rows of vegetables. So look at his broccoli. And normally, you know, broccoli has all kinds of big leaves down here at the bottom, typically, you know, and then you have the heads coming out at the top. That's normal, right? Y'all agree with me? His broccoli had absolutely no leaves left on the bottom of the plant. And one or two of those little tiny narrow leaves at the top, and then here's the broccoli head starting to form, all yellow, all distorted. And I look at that and I go, this plant is telling you it's sick. It doesn't have any of the nutrients. Oh no, that's how broccoli grows. I think so. I'm not buying any of your broccoli, fella, because that's disgusting. All of the lower leaves all the nutrients were pulled out of the lower leaves, translocated up to the newer leaves, so the broccoli could at least keep growing and at least go into reproductive mode. But all these leaves were brown and shriveled up down here on the ground. Because that plant is desperately trying to reproduce because that plant's dying. So you start seeing the lower leaves of your plants shrivel up, dry up, fall off brown, and your plant's trying to tell you, you don't have good nutrient cycling down here. Fix biology in your soil because this is really, really bad news. What's the probability that that broccoli had any nutrition at all in it? Just about zero. I would not choose to eat that broccoli. What's the flavor of that broccoli going to be? And yet, this is organic produce in England. No wonder we don't have the sales of organic in England that we do in other parts of the world. They got some work to do.
Cabbage livers. We've got those guys. Let's see. The white butterflies, like the whole thing, you know, cabbage livers.
Yeah. Typically, when you've actually got them, it is a message from Mother Nature to fix the problem in the soil. And so you want to be bring some of your soil in on Friday so we can look at it. What are you going to do right now to deal with those cabbage loopers and tea? So you got to make a compost tea that you put Bacillus thuringiensis in there, spray your cabbage. The other, if you've got any parsley around, the cabbage loopers love parsley as well, so get that sprayed. So some of the alternate hosts you want to be looking at for those moths.
Are there any plants that the cabbage flies don't like?
Is there anything cabbage flies don't like?
You know, something that can deter them, like
They don't like, it depends on who you talk to, and I think it depends on exactly how healthy your plants are. Like at Rodale, they don't like kelp. They don't like the kale. They don't like, we have a lot of weedy species, those mule ears. They don't like those. But, not the point. We got to fix, even at Rodale, we had to fix the biology in the soil so that the cabbage moths don't keep wiping out our cabbage and our parsley. So, even at Rodale, we're not perfect yet. We'll get there. So hopefully all of that information will be coming out on our website to help you understand what to do under these conditions. But it is now